So this is another talk by Ajahn Chah called Path of Peace. This is just a few paragraphs from it that I found interesting. In this talk, Ajahn Chah gives a complete outline of the practice. So it's about in the middle of the talk that I begin from. At a certain point in the practice, you see that it is the mind which gives orders to the body. The body has to depend on the mind before it can function. However, the mind itself is constantly subject to different objects contacting and conditioning it before it can have any effect on the body. As you continue to turn attention inwards and reflect on the Dhamma, the wisdom faculty gradually matures, and eventually you are left contemplating the mind and mind objects, which means that you start to experience the body, Rupa Dhamma, as Arupa Dhamma, formless. Through your insight, you are no longer uncertain in your understanding of the body and the way it is. The mind experiences the body's physical characteristics as Arupa Dhamma, or formless object, which come into contact with the mind. Ultimately, you are contemplating just the mind and mind objects, those objects which come into your consciousness. Now, examining the true nature of the mind, you can observe that in its natural state, it has no preoccupations or issues prevailing upon it. It is like a piece of cloth or a flag that has been tied to the end of a pole. As long as it's on its own and undisturbed, nothing will happen to it. A leaf on a tree is another example. Ordinarily, it remains quiet and unperturbed. If it moves or flutters, this must be due to the wind, an external force. Normally nothing much happens to leaves, they remain still. They don't go looking to get involved with anything or anybody. When they start to move, it must be due to the influence of something external, such as the wind, which makes them swing back and forth. It's a natural state. The mind is the same. In it, there exists no loving or hating, nor does it seek to blame other people. It is independent, existing in a state of purity that is truly clear, radiant and untarnished. In its pure state, the mind is peaceful, without happiness or suffering, indeed not experiencing any feeling at all. This is the true state of the mind.
Well, yeah. No, it's nothing other than saying you start seeing things arise as phenomena, appear as phenomena, which they already are. Because phenomena, at Dhamma, is the object of the mind, of mano, as a sense. And most people in their day-to-day life, you don't even see that because you're too absorbed with sense world, and usually that then results in all the views as well. Which is not, that's why it's so common to have the assumption of the external public world that we inhabit, the world that is independent of our experience, the material world. But you fail to see that even your assumption of material, it's actually a phenomenon arisen on the level of your thought, on the level of the Dhamma, on the level of the image in your mind. And that's usually how people go about in their day-to-day lives, like not even seeing that not even seeing the mind, the field where these phenomena appear. So they have no signs of it, no recognition of it. So then everything revolves around assumptions of material world, interpretations based on that, and it's all like, again, in itself, it's still on the level of phenomena. But the only difference is a person is completely unaware of it, or a person can be aware of it. So once you start recognizing that your own body, no matter how material it is, how material it might feel, it still can only be known as such because it has arisen on the level of that mind. And in that sense you realize, oh yeah, this is, in a way, has nothing to do with this matter that I'm thinking of, this matter that I assume. It's the opposite way. The matter that I think of and assume is only intelligible because thing is still there on the level of that mind as a phenomenon. and that's what Ajahn Chah referred to as arupa, like non-material. But even a non-material, even a material thing is known only as material thing because that phenomenon has arisen on the level of your mind, which is non-material. So that's why he meant like the mind is the one that governs and that precedes these things structurally. So in other words, nobody, like a person now might start thinking, oh, so the matter, I must find the immaterial or something like that. It's actually the arupa that Ajahn Chah refers to, like the phenomenal nature of things, it's within the material that you're perceiving. So it's not that you must abandon or deny or get rid of the material or stop thinking it in order to see the immaterial. No, you just have to discern it properly, whereby you know that the arisen experience of material body right here, right now, is an image in your mind already. So, and that's like these two tiers of existence, so to speak, two domains. Simultaneous presence of the material domain and the mental domain. Material is inconceivable without a mental designation of it, without a mental phenomena being there simultaneously present. But in the same manner, there would be nothing present as a phenomena on the level of mental domain if the actual physical rupa is not there, still alive. So nama-rupa determines the vijnana, vijnana determines the nama-rupa to the same extent, like two sticks. So you can't separate, you can't investigate them independent of each other. One implies the other. That's just how it works. But in practical terms, the way the experience proliferates with sense, lack of sense restraint and sensuality in the views, you drift away from that phenomenal side of things that's simultaneously there. You drift away from your mind. That's why the Buddha said it's hard to see the mind correctly for what it is. That's why it's a prerequisite for Sotabhati, seeing the signs of your mind, seeing the domain of the phenomenological, whatever you want to call it. Because for most people that's completely overseen.
Into the senses.
Yeah, usually the entire attention gets absorbed. Even if you don't necessarily proliferate or you're like wild, unrestrained. No, I think just naturally, not discerning your mind means automatically over discerning that which comes from your senses, which then influence all the views that you have on account of it, which is the public material world, independent of my experience, scientific sort of measure and data as the objective value, again independent of my experience, failing to see that you cannot even conceive those things unless they are part of your unless they are your experience.
So thinking, when I die, this world will continue.
Exactly, and that's like the two fundamental, like all the wrong views can be boiled down to the two fundamental points. When I die, the world will continue, or when I die, I will continue, not the world. Either way, it's this external projection of your experience as a whole, which is wrong, not because of some higher authority told you to regard it as wrong. It's wrong because it's a contradiction in terms. Like, how can you even know something external of your experience if that's not already experienced? Which means then it's not external of your experience. So it's your experience, parts of it present themselves through your own ignorance, well, based on your own ignorance, present themselves as they're independent of your experience, but you're experiencing it. And that's a contradiction in terms. That's why Attavada is one of the first contradictions to go when you get the right view. The assumption of the external sense of self independent of this experience. And that will go when you realize that no matter how external it might feel, it's still experience, which means it's still internal in that manner. So it doesn't matter how material, how objective it is, the notion of objectivity, notion of materiality, it's on the level of the phenomenon persisting in your mind that gives it its meaning. That's why things are significant and determined by the mind. That's why the mind is the forerunner, as the Buddha would say in the Dhammapada, the forerunner of all things. Like, without the mind giving its determination to these things, it would be inconceivable. There would be no experience. But now that you say that it's all in the mind, that's not true either, because that mind wouldn't be there as a like mirroring the phenomena if the matter is not there to be mirrored in the first place. If the four great elements are not there.
And it shows that inaccessibility of that matter to you.
Exactly.
How inaccessible it is. How
the only way you can access it is the indirect experience of it, which is not it. It's because of it.
So that's the anicca. That's
Yeah,
the
exactly,
anicca, right?
exactly. That's why the Mula Pariyaya Sutta, that conceiving, he conceives in matter, apart from matter, matter is mine, and so on. He develops all these attitudes towards that which is matter, failing to see that he can only experience his experience of matter, not the matter. So his perception can only perceive perception. His feeling can only feel the feeling. Intentions can only intend intentions. So you are not, because assuming that you are perceiving that the genuine Rupa means you are actually accessing that external world of the four Mahabhutas, the four great elements, and that's inconceivable. Hence, the slightest of those assumptions, as described in Mula Pariyaya Sutta, means there is a conceiving of I am. There is a conceiving of a separate entity that's independent and objective from the experience as a whole. That's why the Buddha referred to the four great elements. They cease to find footing. They don't cease to be wherever they are, but they stop finding footing in your experience. As in, you stop conflating the perception that has arisen on account of the four great elements being there with the perception of the actual four great elements. But see, now when you think, oh, so then the four great elements are something different, well, that's also your perception on the level of your thought. So by no means of grasping, by your thought, by your intentions, can you actually ever enter the domain of the four great elements. So you realize all you have to do is stop misconceiving it. That's how it will stop finding the footing. Not by finding it where it is and removing it and so on. Just stop making a mistake of thinking that you can relate to it. And you will keep making the mistake of relating to it for as long as you hold your sense of self dearly. Because the relations with the world is the direct result and also direct fuel for the sense of self. So if you're willing to let go of that sense of self, you will then have no reason to keep maintaining this gratuitous assumption of the world external to you. Because the only reason you do that maintenance is because that's how you maintain your sense of self.
So what about, as Ajahn Chah is saying, the state of the mind?
So if you start recognizing that no amount of materiality, objectivity can be independent of the basis of, can be like found elsewhere except on the basis of the mind, you realize then the mind is the gateway. Doesn't matter what comes your way through your senses, good or bad, threatening or agreeable and friendly, the mind is the basis. And in itself, on that basis of the mind, things are quite indifferent. It's your own attitude then towards what comes through the mind, by not seeing that you want to deal with it, prevent it, want more of it, indulge in sensuality, engage in ill will, because you don't see that, well, you don't need to go and chase these things out there, because even the assumption of out there, it's only been known as such on the level of the phenomenon of your mind. Which means, what if I just know it as a persisting, enduring phenomena right here, right now? I don't need to go anywhere. I just stay with this framework. And then there will be no overly delighting or trying to deny it or get rid of it, which means equanimity will be like a natural result.
Because that's what is there in a way without you.
Absolutely. The mind and the body are there without you.
Yeah.
They don't need your sense of self.
Equanimous.
So that's why you can develop equanimity, because things in themselves are equanimous. They're indifferent to you. It's your own passion and confusion and passion that comes out of that confusion that confuses that whole thing. But if you stop, you yourself, if you stop fueling that passion, confusion disappears, which means then equanimity is restored. Because all you have is things that have arisen and they persist, and that's it. Has nothing to do with you.
So I'll continue with Ajahn Chah's talk, The Path of Peace. And he continues, the purpose of practice then is to seek inwardly, searching and investigating until you reach the original mind. The original mind is also known as the pure mind. The pure mind is the mind without attachment.
That's what I just said.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You find the phenomena there, that you realize phenomena, the way they have arisen in that mind, are already indifferent, are already non-polluted by passion and lust. And it can't really be polluted. Your actions can be polluted by desire and lust. But the persisting phenomena, it's the way it has arisen, which means it's impenetrable to your assumptions, your cravings.
Your attachments.
Your attachments. It's your attachment, that's why it needs constant maintenance, because it can never really get settled in these things that you're attached to or trying to get rid of or whatever. It's only an attitude in regard to it. But thing in itself remains completely indifferent. So you recognize that true indifference, true equanimity comes from the things the way they have arisen, and you have no say in it, even if you want to have a say.
That's the original state.
Exactly. Then you realize, oh, things were always like this in a way. It was me not knowing that they were this way. I kept assuming them to be different.
He continues. So the pure mind is the mind without attachment. It doesn't get affected by mind objects. In other words, it doesn't chase after the different kinds of pleasant and unpleasant mind objects. Rather, the mind is in a state of continuous knowing and wakefulness, thoroughly mindful of all it's experiencing. When the mind is like this, no pleasant or unpleasant mind objects it experiences will be able to disturb it. The mind doesn't become anything. In other words, nothing can shake it. Why? Because there is awareness. The mind knows itself as pure. It has evolved its own true independence. It has reached its original state. How is it able to bring this original state into existence? Through the faculty of mindfulness, wisely reflecting and seeing that all things are merely conditions arising out of the influence of elements, without any individual being controlling them.
The mind gives the meaning, gives the significance simultaneously to the arisen, to the present material domain. But without the material domain, there will be nothing manifesting in the mind. So it's the two sticks holding each other. It's the dyad, as the Buddha referred to. And that's the experience as a whole. Back and front. That's it. It's the dyad. Wherever you look, it's within these two bases that are mutually determined. So there is no room for your sense of self, for your ownership, for your mastery. Or rather, your sense of ownership as it is now, it's within that, which means it's determined by that basis independent of your sense of self. And the sense of self that's not in your own control, that's not yourself then, isn't it? Because sense of self, it's implicitly basically declares ownership, mastery over experience. That's why it's myself, my own self. So you realize that your own self depends upon this basis that you have no say in. And that's how your own self is not yours. So you realize the basis that's not myself, that cannot be myself, determines this sense of self that's because of that not myself. So you actually learn how to perceive not self with the not self.
Right.
And that's what the Buddha was talking about in those different suttas. So when the Ajahn Chah talks about the original mind, again, you can mystify that. You can think, it's this pure, bright mind that you just have to tap into. No, the original mind is right in front of you, where your thoughts are, where these appearances are. The way things arise, you realize they have arisen on their own, to that extent. And you have no say in that. And that is that originality of it. It's not your mastery, your creation of those same things. You realize you can only appropriate things to be mine because they were given beforehand. They have arisen on their own, so I appropriate them. You realize you can't even create anything in that sense. But it's not like a delay. It's not things have arisen then you don't see them. It's a simultaneous presence of these things enduring and your ownership of that endurance. But you want to realize that endurance cannot be owned. That's how you stop owning things. You can't stop owning things by trying to destroy them, get rid of them, and say no to everything. You can stop owning them by realizing that your ownership cannot belong to you. Hence, it's not the ultimate ownership.
Yes, it's an assumption.
Exactly. So the original, the pure mind, seeing how, like as Ajahn Chah said, like there's no room for anyone there, in a way, means exactly that. Inasmuch the mind gives the significance and recognition, allows matter to manifest on its basis, to that same extent, without that matter, there would be nothing for mind to be discerned by. So the matter is the measure of the extent of the mind, and the mind determines the extent of the appeared matter. And whichever way you look is going to be determined by the other. So I am independent of this becomes inconceivable to even assume. But in order to see this correctly, a person has to stop just focusing on things in front of you. Because these two levels I talk about, that Ajahn Chah talks about, they're not in front of you as two objects. Only one can be in front of you. The other one is always from behind, from where you look. And that's when we spoke about in other talks about the peripheral, like learning how to see things peripherally without directly looking at them. Because that's where the mind is, that's where phenomena are. What you see in front of you is the objects of your senses. That's where people are naturally, with the grain, automatically absorbed with the world and senses and chasing pleasures. Because it takes actually effort to learn how to see the context behind it. How to develop that peripheral vision without needing to turn away and look at it, because it won't be peripheral. Like I'm looking at you now and I have all these things peripheral to me. And they will remain peripheral if I keep looking at you. But if I start looking at that, well, that's not peripheral anymore. Now that's the actual right in front of me. And that's the point that you must keep in mind if you try to discern what Ajahn Chah is describing here. That original mind, that arupa, it's basically, rupa is what you're staring, arupa would be everything around it.
Right.
If you look at it, well, that's rupa, because there is rupa there that gives it its existence, but then everything else is arupa. So you want to learn how to see arupa as arupa. You want to see the peripheral as peripheral. By the way, arupa and rupa are not quite used in this sense in the suttas, but Ajahn Chah used it on a practical level, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So I'll continue with the talk. This is how it is with the happiness and suffering we experience. When these mental states arise, they are just happiness and suffering. There is no owner of the happiness. The mind is not the owner of the suffering. Mental states do not belong to the mind. Look at it for yourself. In reality, these are not affairs of the mind. They are separate and distinct. Happiness is just a state of happiness. Suffering is just a state of suffering.
Any phenomena is a phenomenon in itself, which means to that extent it's independent of you. That's why he knows the mind affected with lust as mind affected with lust. It's not like me affected with lust. There is lust present, there is non-lust present. There is happiness present, there is sadness present. It's enduring inasmuch sights are enduring, sounds are enduring, and so on. Anything that manifests, that is its nature, to be manifested. That's it. So even if it's a weird, ambiguous thought, it is real as such, as an experience of an ambiguous thought. But it's our own kind of expectation of concrete, which is fueled by that assumption of material, public concreteness, so to speak, the world independent of me, that prevents you from seeing the mind, seeing the phenomena, seeing the Dhamma. That's why Dhamma means literally phenomena. And then the Dhamma is the teaching of the knowledge of the phenomena, of that which manifests.
Which is right there.
Yeah. It cannot be anywhere else. So it's learning how to see it correctly.
So he says, you are merely the knower of these things. In the past, because the roots of greed, hatred and delusion already existed in the mind, whenever you caught sight of the slightest pleasant or unpleasant mind object, the mind would react immediately. You would take hold of it and have to experience either happiness or suffering. You would be continuously indulging in states of happiness and suffering. That's the way it is as long as the mind doesn't know itself, as long as it's not bright and illuminated. The mind is not free. It is influenced by whatever mind objects it experiences. In other words, it is without a refuge, unable to truly depend on itself. You receive a pleasant mental impression and get into a good mood. The mind forgets itself. In contrast, the original mind is beyond good and bad. This is the original nature of the mind. If you feel happy over experiencing a pleasant mind object, that is delusion. If you feel unhappy over experiencing an unpleasant mind object, that is delusion. Unpleasant mind objects make you suffer, and pleasant ones make you happy. This is the world. Mind objects come with the world. They are the world. They give rise to happiness and suffering, good and evil, and everything that is subject to impermanence and uncertainty. When you separate from the original mind, everything becomes uncertain. There is just unending birth, death, uncertainty, apprehensiveness, suffering, and hardship.
Yeah. And you separate it from the original mind, you separate it from that domain of phenomena. You stop seeing it, or you don't see it as a phenomena, when you never restrain your actions in regard to your senses. The threshold of the being you are used to is on the level of the senses, and pleasure or pain that comes from it. That's why for many people, like they would have the implicit attitude that even their own thoughts don't really exist, are not real, because the expectation of reality has been proliferated so far out. So going back to that original mind, as Ajahn Chah says, it's nothing, some hidden reality behind all these appearances. It's actually stop misconceiving the appearances for what they're not. And that is its original state. That was always there. That's why arahantship is possible in the first place. That's why undoing of the wrong conceiving is possible. Because these things are truly independent of whether you conceive them or not. So that's why a sense of self is a problem, because it's a contradiction in terms. Self means mastery, means ownership, means rulership of your experience. Yet you can only rule that which was given to you beforehand. Which means, well, you're not the ruler then. Because if you were the true creator, master, ruler of these things, you would have been created it. You would have been truly independent of it. But your whole existence depends on these things still being there so that you can maintain your ownership in regard to it. But when that thing decides to go, and it will, that's why we would encourage reflecting of four great elements, how they change. You realize it's inconceivable to even imagine that you still exist in your domain of ownership. So that's not ownership then. And you realize the only way to maintain that sense of ownership of things around you is to ignore the fact that you cannot actually own it. That's why people don't want to think about death naturally. Don't want to think about losing the loved ones, losing things they care, because it's implicit that it will happen. So it just reminds them of the obvious. So you stop being ignorant by making effort, basically, to not ignore things. That's it. Because ignoring things, it's effortless. It's with a grain of sensuality, with a grain of ignorance. Not ignoring takes effort. But not ignoring is not like, oh, I need to resolve some universe mysteries. No, I just need to stop ignoring the very things that are in front of me. Stop ignoring the broader context. Stop ignoring the peripheral to my actual. Stop trying to get rid of the states of mind I don't like. Oh, this should have not arisen, should have not arisen.
Because you can look at just mind objects, isn't it? You can just mind objects.
That's what we do. Like when we do the questioning, ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Fundamentally, is it okay? Is it not okay? And you realize you find that almost as a state that's there enduring, and you had no say in it. Oh yeah, you have lots of joy now because you feel okay. Or you have a bit of a pressure and unpleasant feeling because you don't feel okay. But that fundamental bit of whether it's okay or not okay has arisen on its own. Feeling has been manifested to its own extent, and you have no say in that. That's why I compare it to like the weather that comes and goes. Yeah, you will act differently when the weather's bad. You act differently when the weather's good. You act differently when there's a pleasant feeling, there's unpleasant feeling. But that in itself is not necessarily the problem until your actions delude themselves in believing that they are the controller of the weather. They are the controller of the feelings. And that's why the Buddha would ask that person in that sutta. He says, well, if the feeling is truly yours, as in you are the controller, which one is it then? Because they keep coming and going. Good feelings, bad feelings, neutral feelings. But if you were truly the owner, you would only have good feelings, because ownership and pleasure, hand in hand. Mm-hmm. That's why you want to undermine that pleasure, not by, oh, I must get rid of it, but by seeing it, that actually it cannot be yours. It hasn't come from you. That's how you also then undermine the ownership.
And the seeking of it.
Oh yeah, of course. And then everything else, well, the seeking and everything else that comes, it's if you don't then make the if you don't make the effort to undo it,